Grasshopper here. Welcome back to Axis and Allies Gaming Academy. This is Advanced Training Episode 3. We're going to set this game up, get this table ready for gameplay. Now, if you recall in my last episode, Part 2, we opened up the boxes. We looked at the components and pieces inside 1940 Europe, 1940 Pacific. Of course, we're going to bring them together. We're going to set this up and we're going to play what we're learning in this video series, Axis and Allies 1940 Global 2nd edition. Now, throughout this series, you're going to see a lot of things on my table that obviously did not come with the game boxes. You're going to see custom battle boards, custom card decks, dice, all kinds of things, piece trays, this map that's been printed in front of me. Now, if you go back into my history, you will see a video series called Engineer Training. And you will find a lot of the things that you see on my table in those past videos if you're curious about enhancing your gaming experience the way that I have right now. But we're going to get into the content of this video now. We're going to set up the game. It's something that has to be done every time before we play this epic World War II strategy board game. We're going to start with the first player in the order of play, Germany. Now, you're going to find that there are a lot of things predetermined in this game. Things like starting income, things like your setup, things like your national objectives. Lots of predetermination, just like chess, where your white pieces belong on certain squares and your black pieces belong on certain squares. The setup is always the same. And also Germany is always the first to go. So let's start with them. Be right back. Okay, everybody, I'm back and I just got finished setting up Germany. Let's take a good look here. Now, this is the setup that each and every German player will begin the game with. And yes, they do go first. So that's a predetermined order of play and a predetermined setup. We're going to have to get indoctrinated with some of these unit sculpts because two reasons. I may not have the same unit being used on my table in this video series as you have in your box. That's just the way I have my units spread over 3 or 4 different tables and game sets. But also two, not every nation has the same looking sculpt for the same unit. For example, German cruisers will look different than Japanese cruisers, and American tactical bombers will look different than United Kingdom tactical bombers. So let's get into the basics of looking into some of these unit sculpts and what they are. I'm just going to go quickly here. Infantry, tank, infantry, fighter, tank, infantry, tactical bomber, infantry, artillery, AA gun, tactical bomber, strategic bomber, infantry, tank, artillery, tactical bomber, fighter, mechanized infantry, artillery, infantry, AA gun, infantry, artillery, tank, fighter, infantry, fighter, battleship, transport, cruiser, and submarine, sub. So that's just a brief flyby of what we call these pieces. It's important for, of course, when you're new, you have to set up the game. I got this nifty little setup card right here. Okay, but you have the setup that's on the lids of your piece trays. And like I said before, you have to get accustomed to what each nation's unit looks like. And there's reference at the back of the rulebook for that as well. Let's move on to Russia. All right, everyone, we've set up Russia next simply because they are second in the order of play. They're quite thin, spread out, not much to see, mostly infantry. They've got lots of these bare territories, but they also have these significant infantry stacks over here in the Soviet Far East territories facing Japan. But all this terrain that they need to protect. Now, I'm going to go over some of the infantry that you see here, but first I want to sew up the fact that we didn't finish Germany. We need to collect their starting income, which is part of the setup for each nation. and I'm going to put a roundel on the income tracker. So they begin the game with 30 IPCs. Let's go and mark that. And by the time we're finished this video, all the nations will be represented here on the income tracker. There's 30 IPCs for Germany to start. Now, a big misconception is that nations begin with any national objective bonuses that are already claimed. That's not true. Take a look here. We've got some national objectives. National objectives are to be collected during the collect income phase. You do not begin the game with any national objective income, only the starting income. And the starting income consists of the value of the territories that you control. Take a look at Norway. We have 3. And everything that they control adds up to 30 IPCs. And that's their beginning income. So back to Russia here. Let's take a look. We've got Russian tank, mechanized infantry, AA gun, tactical bomber, tank, artillery, mechanized infantry, infantry, fighter, AA gun, fighter, artillery. We got a cruiser, a submarine, and a submarine here. We have an artillery, and the rest, I believe, are infantry. Let's take a look here at what I'm using for factories. I've got a major factory here and a minor factory. Now, your game comes with these cardboard square chits that have factories, air bases, and naval bases on them. Take a look here. My map has the air bases and the naval bases already printed on it. Your game's going to come with these little cardboard pieces. I recommend that you customize your game, engineer your gaming experience to swap those out for something else, like what I've done. Not necessarily exactly what I've done. They're hard to pick up. They take up some unnecessary room on the board. I mean, even if you are going to take up some room on the board, make it look nice like that instead of those little cardboard counters. Okay guys, be right back. We're going to set up Japan, take a look at them. Oh, before I do, let's collect our starting income. So, starting income for Russia is 37 IPCs. There we are. We're going to put that right on top so we know whose stack that is. And we're going to mark them on the income tracker. All right. Their setup is complete and Japan is next. All right, everyone. Now we're looking at Japan. Look at all these sea units. These big naval ships, aircraft. Now this looks more fun, right? Some infantry on islands, cruisers, battleships. Let's take a look and zoom in to this home fleet. I want to show you a little trick with the tactical bombers on the aircraft carriers. Now, if you take a look here, they have little feet, and it's ultimately difficult to keep trying to get them to stay. I just lean them up against, put their feet on the platform and the tail over the edge. So much easier to set up. Little trick. Let's just get into these chips for a second. We've got this red chip. I call it a fiver. Represents 5 units. You put the unit on top. That's 6 units total, okay? Same over here with the 5 underneath and the 1 on top. That's 6. Now here in Korea, 1, 2, 3, and with the plastic unit on top, 4 total. So 4 infantry there. Now, in your box set, you've got some green chips. I don't use those, but they do come with the game. Therefore, representing 3 units. So perfect example to put a green chip there on top would represent 4. Like I said, I don't use them. I actually gave mine away to a friend, but if you have them, you can use them. This is a perfect place to use your green chips where there are 4 units. Now, let's do a bit of a flyby here. Now, Japan is a very dominant country to begin the game. They may not have a lot of starting income, but they definitely have units. 21 aircraft to begin the game. 21. Let's take a look and see how their unit sculpts differ from other nations. So we have aircraft carrier, tactical bomber, fighter, cruiser, battleship, submarine, transport, destroyer, artillery, infantry, tank, AA gun, tactical bomber, fighter, strategic bomber, infantry, fighter, artillery, mechanized infantry, AA gun, infantry, fighter, tactical bomber, infantry, artillery, infantry, tactical bomber, fighter, artillery, infantry, battleship, transport, destroyer, submarine, fighter, infantry, fighter, cruiser, transport, aircraft carrier, tactical bomber, fighter, destroyer, infantry, AA gun, and infantry. So you can see that some of these units that Japan owns are different than other nations. For example, the cruisers are unique. These artillery units are unique to Japan. So it adds a lot to the game when you have different sculpts. It wasn't always like this in past Axis and Allies franchise games like Classic Edition, where all the sculpts looked the same, but they were a different color. Of course, back in the late 80s, we didn't care. We were just playing an awesome game, but it's nice to see the game progress like this with the different sculpts. So Japan begins with 26 IPCs. So we'll just give them their starting income. 10, 5, 1, 26. We're going to put that on there. They're going to need that. And let us put a roundel on the income tracker for them. So 26 IPCs right there. And that is Japan's setup. Now we're going to get into the United States. Japan was third in the order of play. Now the United States goes fourth after Japan in the order of play. And let's get into seeing how well they start the game. So we've set up America now, guys, and we're here over at Central United States and Eastern United States. We got a couple of ships in the Atlantic there. Now it doesn't look like a whole lot, and we'll go over that a little bit in this clip. But while I'm over here, I just want to show you and name the pieces before we head over to the Pacific side and see what they've got going on over there. So we've got a strategic bomber, a mechanized infantry, a tank, an artillery, an AA gun, an infantry, an artillery, a fighter. We've got a cruiser here and a transport. Now, I want you to focus in on these factories here. Minor factory here, minor factory here. Now, America is a nation that is restricted by a lot of political situations, similar to Russia, if you remember. The reason being is because both the United States and Russia begin the game as a neutral nation. So their production, America's production, is not very high, so they begin the game with minor factories. Let's go over to the Pacific side now. And America is very unique in the sense that they do wage war a lot on both sides of the map. Let's take a look now at Western United States. Pretty significant fleet here. We got infantry, mechanized infantry, fighter, artillery, AA gun on land. We got a loaded carrier, a transport, battleship, cruiser, destroyer. Now the tactical bomber is different than the Japan tactical bomber. It's got more of a flat belly rather than the feet, so it fits on the aircraft carrier a little bit better. But look at here, we got another minor factory. Now, just like a neutral nation, they're not at war. They're not joined by any side. They don't have allies, and here we've got a small fleet in Hawaii. However, if Japan decides to attack them, or it comes to a certain point in the game where if Japan has not attacked them, they're allowed to declare war on their own. No matter how they enter the war, whether it be by a unprovoked attack or a simple declaration of war, these minor factories will immediately turn into major factories. Now in the game, you can buy minor factories, you can even buy major factories. You can spend the money to upgrade from a minor factory to a major factory. However, this specific rule for America only is that when they enter the war, their minor factories, and remember there's 3 of them, minor factories turn into major factories for free. Doesn't cost them anything. So their production capability will skyrocket once they're at war. Let's take a look at Pearl Harbor. We've got infantry, fighter, destroyer, sub, cruiser, and transport. And again, over here, the Philippines, we have destroyer, submarine, fighter, infantry. So this does not seem like a lot, does it, in comparison to the number of units and the more powerful units of Japan. We'll talk a little bit about that later. But we have a very vulnerable island and boats here if Japan decides to attack early. Now there's pros and cons to that. There's risk versus reward. And even this is in range of all the boats and aircraft that can make it. You know, this is safe, but if you consider the positioning as well with the Americans, look at the sea zone gap between their home fleet and the Japanese home fleet. So whatever they build is going to take time to get over here. So as America, even though it seems like you're powerful and you may have a lot of money, the positioning and the starting units, you're going to have to be a pretty savvy purchaser, a savvy buyer. Very logistical as well, with transports, loading them up properly, having the right units in the right fleet, the right aircraft to fill aircraft carriers, and again the land units to fill transports. All this has to be well thought out to be the most effective because of the space between your production capabilities and the actual fighting. Okay, so let's get into their starting income. Grab some chips here. And the United States are on this side. So we've got 52 IPC starting income. 20, 30, 40, 50, and 2. 52 IPCs and 52. So you see what I mean by money. Yes, they have money, and any player might think, I want to play the richest nation. But it's not always sunshine for the Americans. They've got a challenge to make the right purchases and get themselves in position to fight a war. And again, you have to split that income between fighting in the Pacific and what's needed over here against Japan, and fighting in the Atlantic and what's necessary and needed to help out allies once they enter the war. So China is next. America was 4th in the order of play. China is 5th. We're going to get right into that setup right now. Okay, everyone, we have arrived at China, and we have some infantry stacks to show you. Maybe one fighter, but that's about it. I can fit all their territories in one screenshot there. Let's zoom in and show you some infantry stacks. Now, sorry for the bad focus in the last clip. I'll try and keep it clean. I know it can feel a bit nauseous with bad focus and fast camera work. I can guarantee you that there won't be any fast camera work here with China. Everything is right in front of us. Now, they do have some special rules, and we have the whole series to talk about that. I'm going to give them their own video talking solely about China rules. However, I did talk a lot about predetermined things that happen from nation to nation. Of course, one of those things is the turn sequence. Just like China, everyone needs to abide by the turn sequence. Okay? However, they may not be able to do everything in the turn sequence. They do, however, collect an income. And that income is 12 IPCs to start. So let's put that down right here. 2 5s, 2 singles, 12 IPCs to start. And we'll take their roundel and set up the turn tracker. Now, while I'm here talking about China, I'm just going to tell you guys that in the description box of this video, I am going to provide a link where you can go for the setup charts for all nations. So the complete 1940 Global 2nd edition setups in a document for you on a forum thread. I'm going to provide a link in the description box of this video. Sometimes when you customize your trays like I have, you tend to either throw out or lose those trays that have the setups on them. And I can tell you that that is the only place in the entire box where you will find the national setups. You won't find them in the rule book. You won't find them on the backs of any cards in the game. They're on the trays, and if you don't take the trays with you, you're stuck. You don't have the setups. But just print the document that I provided for you in the description box of this video, and you will have them, and it'll all be easy to set up. And I can talk to you and show you about the cards in a future video, how you can get those cards also too, these cards as well, for setting up this game the way that I'm using. Okay, be right back. That was China. They are 5th in the order of play. Next is the mighty United Kingdom, and they're a large setup, so it'll be a little bit slower getting back than I have for the other ones.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
All right, everyone, we're back, and I just got finished setting up the United Kingdom. It took a while because they are spread out from the east to the west. Let's take a look and start over here in Canada. Yes, Canada is not their own nation in this game. However, Anzac, aka Australia, does have their own units and their own turn sequence, but I'm not bitter. Over here we have the Royal Navy. We have some Spitfires there. We're going to go over some of the units and the sculpts and how they look for UK, but I want to span and show you all kinds of range that UK has over here as well. Now we're going to spend a great deal of time learning about the split income. The split economy of the United Kingdom is very unique to 1940 Global. No other Axis and Allies game in the franchise has this rule dynamic. And essentially, London, the capital here on the eastern or European side of the board, collects an income, and Calcutta, also classified as a capital, collects an income for the territories over here on the Pacific side of the board. Obviously, I think a lot of that came from the fact that you split this game up into 2 separate games, and that's how the money is divided, so they didn't change much. Something you need to understand about the setup here for 1940 Global and the 2 separate theater games, Europe and Pacific, is the setups are almost identical. And I say almost because of one factor, but identical. You will see this setup for Japan when playing only Pacific. And like I said, I do not play the theater games on their own. And I can tell you that the only difference, from what I understand, is the amount of infantry here in Egypt for the UK. And I'll explain why in a later video. Also, I'm going to explain why in a later clip, why these 2 units are out here like this. A couple of British units, and we have South Africa. Let's get started. Let's take a look and show you what the UK or British sculpts look like. And again, the units that are on my table might vary from what you have out of box, simply because I'm using a different sculpt on this table by itself. But again, the other reason, because nation to nation, the sculpt shapes will be different for the same unit. So UK, artillery, infantry, tank, infantry, transport, destroyer, destroyer, transport, battleship, cruiser, destroyer. We have infantry, fighter, AA gun, infantry, mechanized infantry, strategic bomber. Down here, cruiser, fighter. We have infantry, AA gun, fighter. Tank, artillery, infantry, mechanized infantry, artillery, infantry, tactical bomber, aircraft carrier, transport, cruiser, destroyer. Infantry, destroyer. We're almost done. We're going to go over here to the Pacific side now. We've got infantry, artillery, AA gun, fighter, tactical bomber, fighter, infantry, battleship, destroyer, cruiser, transport, and infantry. So quite spread out, lots of different units. You know, definitely need the setup card to set up a lot of this. Now, I just want to point out one thing before I move on to the next territory. Let's take a look at what I was saying before with these little symbols, little icons here. This is a naval base. Of course, you can tell that I've got a custom map. It's all one piece, it's printed. And up here, air base. Now, in your game, you're going to have creases in your maps. It's going to come in 4 separate pieces that you join together. And if you're playing with just the components that come out of the box, you're going to have all kinds of these little cardboard counters with anchors and planes on them, and even factories on them. Now, I have mine printed on the board, but it comes to 41 pieces. Sorry, not on Malta, that's first edition. 41 of these spread out all over the board. 41. Now, I'm saying this because I want you to keep in mind that that's something that you're going to need to set up if you are playing with just the components that come out of the box. And it was my idea years ago to put these directly on the map simply because I didn't want to set them up all the time. And by having them like this, they're not 3D, so you can have more pieces on the board instead of moving around this cardboard counter all the time. So that's why I did that. Obviously, if they become damaged in strategic bombing raids, you put a couple of damage markers underneath and one of those cardboard chits that you get in the game, put it right on top. And when it becomes fully repaired, you just remove it all and then you're back to fully repaired. So again, they're everywhere. They're everywhere on this board, and it is something that you're gonna have to do. Be mindful of. These air bases and naval bases are very important to the game. They're necessary. They need to go on the board. And with Britain having so many air bases and naval bases on hand, it was important to at least mention that in this particular clip. So let's get into what they collect. Now remember, I said split economy. Now we're going to talk a lot about this unique split economy between Britain. It's very dynamic. The important thing to remember is in your box set, you're going to have a couple of these. So the starting income for the UK Pacific is 17 IPCs, 17. We're going to put that right there. It's kind of like, even though it's 2 incomes, it's not 2 turn sequences. And that's where the confusion comes in. Don't worry, we're going to explain that. It's going to become second nature to you in no time. Let's just mark this because that's important. We need to know where the UK Pacific economy is at. And here we've got 28 IPCs. Let's get another one. 28, 25, and 28 IPCs for UK Europe. That's how they're identified. UK Europe and UK Pacific. 28. And they're now well marked and their stacks are right in front of them when they're ready to start purchasing units. We know and that's why we put the chits on both stacks here to make sure that we identify whose income is for who. All right, that is the United Kingdom. We're going to be right back. Italy is next. Italy. So here's the Italian setup, and let's zoom in and see what they're working with. They've got some sea units in the Mediterranean. They've got some land units splattered all over between Europe and Africa, and I see some air units there as well. Let's take a look at their sculpts and see what their units look like. We have artillery, tank, infantry, AA gun, strategic bomber, AA gun, fighter, infantry, tank, infantry, artillery, tank, mechanized infantry, artillery, infantry. Let's look at the sea units: transport, cruiser, destroyer, sub, transport, cruiser, battleship, transport, and destroyer. Over here we have an artillery and some infantry units, but this is about it. It is not the most fun to play, especially if you're facing an aggressive allied player, but we can get more into that during strategy videos. Usually the German player will also play Italy, but we'll also discuss that in a different separate video. I'm going to move on now. Let's do Anzac and France together in the same clip. Be right back. Alright everyone, we have set up Anzac, aka Australia. Let's zoom in a little bit. They're using gray pieces in this game. But before we go into their unit sculpts and identifying what pieces they're using, let's go back over here to the Europe side. Take a look. We've also set up France. They're using the blue pieces. France, we're going to look at them here shortly. But back to Italy, we forgot to give them their starting income. Let's take a look. Italy is the 8th player or nation to go in the order of play, the 8th. We're going to put 10 IPCs in front of them. That's their starting income. And let's put a roundel on the income tracker to show where they start, right there, number 10 spot. And 8th in the order of play is Anzac. We've got 10 IPCs starting income. 10 IPCs for Anzac. Let's put that in front of their tray. And let's get their roundel on the income tracker. They're going to share the 10 spot with Italy. And finally, 9th in the order of play, 9th is France. They're going to get 19 IPCs. It's the total value of all the territories that they control to start the game, 19. And let's get their roundel on the income tracker. So the income tracker should be complete now. Every nation is represented on the income tracker, shows their starting income. We're all set in that regard. Now let's take a look at Anzac units, Anzac sculpts. Okay, we have infantry, AA gun, infantry, artillery, fighter, transport, destroyer, cruiser, infantry, fighters. Now, I really liked first edition sculpts for Anzac. When second edition came around, they were changed, and the C units look too similar for myself. These are second edition units. And the infantry are really tall. However, I'm using different infantry. So a bit of a fail, in my opinion, from first edition to second edition. I didn't feel it was necessary to change those nice looking sculpts for Anzac. Now remember, I showed you during the UK video, I wanted to show you why we were doing this. Look here, we've got all these blue French units here. Reason being is because we've gone ahead and set up the battle board right away for France. So France, why did we do that? Well, Germany goes first, remember? So they, as a standard move, are going to come in and attack Paris. That's going to happen. Now, with what, we don't know, but we do know what is sitting in France to defend. That's why we've set up the battle board. I recommend that you just go ahead and set up the battle board instead of trying to fit all those pieces here in this territory. It's already pretty crowded in Europe. Okay, let's take a look at France pieces. We have, and again, in some situations, we're going to have multinational units on the same territory to start the game. This is a perfect example. So we have French infantry and fighter in here in London. We got a French cruiser, infantry, artillery, infantry, artillery. Now they're going to start with some production facilities, a minor factory, a major factory there. Let's take a look again. We have destroyer and cruiser, infantry, 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 and finally a destroyer down here around Madagascar. And let's take a look at what's in France. We have an AA gun and an infantry, artillery, tank, fighter. And for the British, here's an artillery and a tank. And all this is there defending Paris to begin the game. So what else can I say? Remember back earlier where I mentioned that the only difference between the setup for 1940 Global versus the single Europe game and the single Pacific game was here in Egypt. And I can show you and tell you now that it's because Anzac begins with 2 infantry in Egypt for the global game, where if you were only playing Europe, there are no gray Anzac infantry pieces, of course, in the Europe game. I believe, therefore, the setup calls for at least an extra infantry under the British there. I believe that's what it is. So there we have it, everybody. We are all set up to play with the units. We have the starting income in front of everybody. Now, in the next clip, I'm going to talk to you about some things that are important before play, some last final touches for setup. But before I go and get into that last clip, I just want to do a scan and show you how everything kind of fits. Now, of course, when you place the German pieces on first and you put all these submarines out in the middle of the Atlantic, you're not 100% sure of what exactly the landscape or environment is going to look like. But now that the United States and the United Kingdom, Russia and Italy, their pieces are all on, you can kind of see how they all sort of clash and how they're all sort of prepared to fight. And remember, the order of play, very, very important. Okay, for other things as well, we're going to talk about blockers and can openers, where the order of play comes in as a heavy strategy. And you can see now the Chinese forces that Japan has to deal with, UK as well as Anzac and the United States. It might seem kind of daunting for Japan, considering that they are surrounded by 5 enemies. The United States, of course, once they enter the war. Russia has some units up here which could tangle with Japan. China right in front of them. UK Pacific, and the 5th enemy surrounding them, of course, Anzac. However, they start well, and an experienced Japan player can handle the 5 enemies surrounding them. Alright guys, be right back. We're going to wrap this video up. Cheers. Just do one last flyby there. And you're all set to play. Let's just sew up a couple final things. Be right back. Okay everyone, we're going to end this lesson with one final clip. We're going to talk about the rule book and jump in here and look at a couple things. A couple of things that are necessary to deal with before we start gameplay. But let me first explain that I say rule book loosely. It's actually rule books. You get 2 games, you get Europe and Pacific, you're going to obviously get 2 books. Now that can be confusing, of course, when you're playing a global experience and you need to reference or look up a rule and you have to decide, is it going to be in the Europe book? Is it going to be in the Pacific book? Now, more often than not, the majority of the content is the same from one to the other, especially in the final pages where you look at global rules. The same content is in each book. global rules. But there's a lot to be desired with this two rulebook system. For example, the table of contents could be better. But I digress. I'm going to use this to help you along and reference things throughout this video series. Let's take a look here. Now, I've got everything in one binder with page protectors. I've got in the first bit here, I've got the Europe rulebook. And in the middle here, the Pacific rulebook starts. Let's go all the way to the back and show you some global rules. These are the global rules that each rulebook has. I want to show you here research and development. This is important. Before setup, all players need to decide if they're going to play with this optional rule or not. And remember, it is an optional rule. Research and development. I do not suggest as new players that you bring this into your game. Try and have a bunch of games under your belt before you decide if you're going to play with this optional rule. Not only is it something that I believe is a broken system, but it can actually be negative to your gaming experience. Now, not bringing it in can't be negative to your gaming experience, so I'm going to suggest that you leave it out. Of course, however, we need to find out if all players are going to agree to keep it in the game, or if all players are going to disagree and leave it out. That's something that needs to be done as part of your setup. Final thing I want to go over, let's take a look, and global rules begins here on page 33 of the Pacific rulebook. Take a look there, it says number of players. Now, it's going to tell you how to divide up all the players around your table with the nations available. I consider this a suggestion rather than a rule, okay? Now, obviously, take a look here. Player 1 is going to play the Axis player, and player 2 is going to play the Allied players when there's two players playing, obviously. But then they get into suggesting who plays what when 3 players, 4 players, 5 players, even 6 players are around the table. Now, the configurations that they've come up here is not something that I agree on. I like to divide the nations up differently. However, I suggest that you survey who's playing, all the people around your table, consider all kinds of aspects like experience playing or, the learning curve that's necessary. Now, some people many times are going to play more than one nation. However, some people might be comfortable with just playing one nation. Maybe that nation is small and their role in the game is small. Now remember, there's a lot of downtime in this game. It's a long game to play. So if you want to stay in the action, you'll take on more nations. However, that doesn't mean that you're not going to be a part of the game significantly. You could take a small nation and play them very well and focus and use your time to think and have a great impact on the game. So we're going to decide if we're doing research and development. We're going to decide how the nations among the players are going to be divided. And then we're ready to play, guys. Thanks a lot for sticking through this episode of Advanced Training. We're going to get into part 4. Very excited to talk about the next few things that are necessary to learn this game. Stick with me. Don't get intimidated. We're going to go over a lot of detail. And, it could be a long series. I'm not quite sure how many episodes this will take, but it'll be a lot of fun going through it. All right. Cheers, guys. See you in the next episode. Take care, and may all your rules be ones.